Hello Year 11, we're going to start today's lesson with a few horrific facts. Did you know more people have access to a mobile phone than they do a toilet worldwide? What a shocking fact. Every year developing countries, that's our poorer countries, are robbed of more than $1 trillion that could help fight poverty, disease and hunger. More than 1/3 of Africa lacks clean water. I mean, what an incredible statistic. Diarrhea and pneumonia together kill more kids than AIDS, malaria and TB combined. The shocking thing there is these are all things that are preventable. The value of Africa's exports, that's what it sells, of oil, gas and minerals was nearly 8 times the value of international aid the continent received in 2011. So where's all that money actually going? Suggests a bit of corruption to me. 25.3 million children die from malnutrition every year. Aren't those just shocking facts? Today, we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at the causes of uneven development. That means why it is. We're looking at the reasons why some countries around the world are much wealthier, have much better healthcare systems, are far more developed, have better transport systems and so on, compared to others. So we're really looking at why there is this divide between rich and poor. And we're also going to look at some of the consequences of that too. So to start off, you need to draw this in your book. So you're creating 2 columns to show the causes of uneven development and an explanation column as well. Please use the whole page. You can do this portrait wise, whatever. The column for causes can be fairly narrow, just like my one there, but the explanation column needs to be most of the page. And as we go through these slides, I'm going to be doing quite a bit of talking, you're going to be doing quite a bit of listening, and you're going to be adding things onto your table. So we're going to look at a number of different physical causes. When we get to the end of one, you'll rule off, and then we'll look at another. And then we'll move on to the human causes. So these are will explain why it is that some countries are rich and some are poor. Okay, the first thing I want you to write down as a cause is landlocked countries. And this map in front of you is showing you which countries are landlocked. In other words, they don't have any coast connecting to their country. So they are entirely surrounded by other countries. And being landlocked is a reason why some countries struggle to develop. The main reason is because of trade. As countries, if you're surrounded by water or you have a coastline, you're able to trade very easily with other nations because of ships going in and out from ports. However, if you're landlocked, in order to trade and get to the coast, you have to pass through other countries. And that obviously causes big problems politically, because other countries might not allow you access, or they might decide to charge you. But also the fact that it puts a lot of money on transport costs of getting product through other countries to their coastlines. So it causes a whole host of problems for countries. So they find it very difficult to trade. And if they can't trade with other countries, then they really do struggle to develop. As you will notice, quite a lot of countries that are landlocked happen to be in Africa, which is consequently one of the poorest continents in the world. So write down your landlocked countries and causes, and please write down a short summary of what I've just said about being landlocked and why it stops countries from developing their economies. Then move on. Okay, the other reason, physical cause, is climate-related diseases. So put that down, please, in your causes. And in particular, as a nice example, malaria. Again, there's a map in front of you, and the map shows which countries suffer the most with climate-related diseases. And once again, you can pick out a pattern here. The whole of sub-Saharan Africa suffers with climate-related diseases quite badly, and so do countries in southern Asia. So I'll just circle these areas. This is South Asia and Southeast Asia over here, and then we've got sub-Saharan and tropical Africa here. And we've got an awful lot of disease, for instance malaria, that strikes in these areas, which again will be a reason why they struggle to develop their economies because people are poorly, they are sick, they are unable to be productive at work, and there's obviously a cost associated with trying to treat poorly people. So in summary, tropical Africa, South America as well, just here, and Asia have more climate-related diseases and pests than cooler parts of the world. And things like mosquitoes will spread disease. Disease affects the ability of the population to stay healthy enough to work, and therefore they struggle to develop their economies. So again, a short explanation, please, explaining that, and then move on. Another cause is extreme weather. My example there on the slide is drought, and the map is showing you areas that suffer badly with drought. So the darker the red colour, the worse it is for drought. But there are other kinds of extreme weather as well. There are cyclones, or hurricanes as you might know them as. There are things like floods as well. And these kind of extreme weather events, they wreak absolute havoc over the areas that they affect. You think about the damage that's caused in a hurricane and the damage that's caused in a flood. These countries end up spending money that they've got on repairing infrastructure, and that hinders their development because otherwise they would spend that money on developing areas of business and industries to provide jobs to people so that the economies can grow. But instead, money is diverted into either trying to protect people against this kind of extreme weather or on repairing all the damage that's been caused when it happens. And once again, this extreme weather generally tends to affect tropical regions. So let's look here at Africa. Once again, I'm just circling the northern part of Africa there. And again, we've got southern Asia. The two poorest places in the world are being affected the most by extreme weather. And that's one of the reasons why they are poor, because they are held back from extreme weather events, or because of extreme weather events. Produce a little summary for your explanations on why this is causing uneven development, and then in a moment we'll move on. It might be worth at this point also noting out when you look to areas in the north, for instance, Europe here, in terms of extreme weather, we're really not getting much. And the same in a way with the, I suppose, the northern part of the United States of America. There isn't really much in the way of extreme weather. So therefore, that kind of accounts as well for why these are some of the richer nations in the world. And the final physical factor for you to write down in your causes column is a lack of safe water. This map here is showing you the percentage of population using an unimproved drinking water source. In other words, using dirty water, water that has not been treated. And as you can see here, the orange areas show you that the percentage is more than 20%, so almost more than a quarter of people. It can be higher than 20% because that's more than. And once again, when we look at the map, you notice that areas of sub-Saharan Africa and Central Africa have more than 20% of people drinking an unimproved water source. Compare that again to countries in the north and in the west, like the United States of America, the whole of North America there, and the continent of Europe there, and the continent of Oceania there, the three richest continents in the world. You can see in terms of a percentage, less than 1% is drinking bad water. In other words, we've got almost the entire population has access to clean running water that has been treated. And that will have an immediate impact on our health. Because we'll be healthier, we won't get sick from drinking dirty water. We're able to go to work, we're able to be productive, we're not having to take days off because we're poorly, and we're able to help our economies grow. Unlike the people of Africa here, who in fact are probably spending many days with a dicky tummy, are unable to go to work because they're poorly, and therefore they cannot help the economy grow. A couple of extra things to add as well about these people in Africa is that they also end up having to waste time each day going to collect water. We're all on a main supply in high-income countries. You can go and turn a tap and out the water comes. But in Africa, they're not on main supplies. They have to go and find water. And for some people, that might be a 10-kilometre journey once or twice a day. So they can actually spend up to half their day going to collect water. That means that they are not being productive in terms of making money and helping the economy grow. So that's another point, please, to put down in your explanation. Another point is the fact that because they lack the money for high-tech equipment, they're unable to irrigate the land on a commercial level. In other words, they're unable to spend the money on massive sprinkler systems in order to have very, very large farms and be able to grow food on a massive scale, which they'd then be able to export to other countries and earn a living from. If you can farm on a commercial scale, that means that you can do it as a business and you can make money and the economy can grow. But these people here are very unlikely to be able to farm on a commercial scale because they simply haven't got the money to be able to afford the equipment to do so. So again, that holds their economies back. And finally, in Africa, even when they do get plenty of rain, because remember, this area of Africa that I've circled is tropical. They get rain daily. They have plenty of water. But the point is, they don't have the money to be able to store it and treat it to make it safe. They don't have the money to develop that infrastructure. So they struggle to develop water storage and distribution systems, and therefore people continue to drink bad water and get poorly. So those reasons collectively cause a development gap. So when we put all of those images together, the pattern that you can notice, you can pause this and you can have a little look at the pattern. The pattern that you notice is that the continent that's affected the most by lack of water, extreme weather events, being landlocked and so on tend to be in Africa, and that explains its physical reasons why African countries basically are kept poor whilst high-income countries are able to just get richer and richer and richer and develop their economies. So we are going to have a go at a very short 4-mark question. We've now created something called the development gap. The uneven development of nations has caused a gap between the poorest countries and the others. This gap is called the development gap. Your question: explain how physical factors have caused uneven development. In other words, explain why physical factors have caused poor countries to be poor and rich countries to be rich, why there is this uneven development. If you want some help for this question, you need to start by stating one of the factors that we've just written about. For example, you could state that being landlocked causes uneven development. That would get you 1 mark. And then for the second mark, you need to explain why being landlocked hinders them from developing. If you do that, you earn 2 marks. And then you need to repeat for a second factor. Please spend 5 minutes writing up a really good answer now, which you will then submit to your teacher. When you've done that, move on. Okay, we've looked at the physical factors. Now we're going to look at the human causes of uneven development. The first one for your table is historical. So you'll need to put a little title, historical and human causes. The first cause then for historical, and this can go into your explanation, is to do with colonialism. From the 1400s, explorers looked to control new territories. Many African countries were literally taken over and their resources, including their people, were taken. And this continued right up to the 1900s. So for all those years, Europeans were arriving in Africa and they were taking control of territories. You don't need to really understand all the history about it, but they were arriving there, they were taking control of territories, they were taking their raw materials, they were taking their people, and that obviously will have hindered their development. And even to this day, they are still recovering from that period of time. Think back to the slave trade that you will have learned about in history. Their best people were taken off the African continent and taken over to Europe and to North America and sold as slaves. So of course that will have hindered the development of African countries. Then, since the 1950s, many of these colonies that were taken over in Africa, they have fought for their independence. They have fought to be free again. And this has often resulted in wars, and money has been spent on weapons, and it's been spent through corrupt governments that have pocketed money that they've had. And it's meant that the people haven't had money spent on them and improving their quality of life. So when money gets spent on weapons and war and repairing damage, it is not being spent on things like businesses and industries, which obviously provide jobs and help economies grow. So that has kept many African nations down. It's kept them from being able to develop their economies. And that is part of their history and our history. And we as humans were responsible for that. Please make some summary notes on colonialism, please, and how it's affected Africa's development, and then move on. Okay, the next one for your causes column is world trade. And there are a few images here showing different things. So on the left, we've got some coffee beans. On the right, we have cocoa. Bottom, we've got a boy mining for something called coltan, which you can then see in the middle picture. And on the bottom right, we have tea. These are all raw materials. So when I said that top left picture was coffee, that may have surprised you, because you think about coffee in terms of what's in the jar in your cupboard at home, which is brown and a little dusty. That's processed. This coffee here that you're looking at is what it looks like when it comes from the plant. It is a raw material. Same with the cocoa beans on the top right image. If you were to go and bite into one of those, it would not taste like chocolate. It would taste disgusting and bitter because it hasn't been processed yet. So that's a raw material. The coltan down in the bottom that you're looking at, that has been mined, and that ends up in your mobile phones. It's an extremely important mineral that's used in the production of mobile phones. But in that instance there, it's simply just a raw material. And on the right, when you have tea in your tea bags, it certainly doesn't look like that. So again, that has not been processed. So this is what raw materials are. Raw materials are things that have been taken out of the ground, or they've been grown, or they've been taken out of the sea, and they are exactly as they have been dug up or captured. They have not had any kind of processing done to them. And in this state, they're not worth very much money at all. They're in fact very, very, very cheap. And it's because of world trade of these kinds of commodities that has kept some people poor and enabled others to get very powerful. So this is a few points. Now you don't need to write all of these down, but you do need to listen to my explanation so that you understand. World trade is dominated by the richer countries. That's the first thing you need to know. Rich countries like us and large international companies like BP oil or Shell oil or Amazon, so really big companies, they are very, very powerful. Rich countries want to pay as little as possible for their imports. So whatever they buy from other countries, they don't want to pay too much money for it. And they want to get as much as possible for their exports. So whatever they sell to other countries, they want to make loads of money from. So they want to buy for cheap and they want to sell for a lot. That's how they make money, and that's how their economies grow. Poor countries generally export raw materials. So the pictures you saw on the previous slide, that's what they're generally exporting. And as I said to you, they are cheap because they're unfinished. They've got plenty of coffee beans, they've got plenty of cocoa beans, and they haven't been processed in any kind of way, so they're dirt cheap. And they will sell those dirt cheap products to us. And we will not pay very much money for them because they're not finished. So we are buying the beans, we are not buying the coffee finished, as an example. Number 5, there are plenty of supply of raw materials, and that keeps the prices low. I've told you this before, if you have a lot of something, it's cheap. But if something's rare, it's expensive. That's why diamonds are expensive and gold is expensive because it's rare. The next point, processing the raw material is what adds value to them. The more processed something is, the more expensive it is. Take again the example of the mobile phone. A mobile phone that you buy has had so much processing done to it. It's made up of hundreds of parts, hundreds of pieces, and all of those have been finished to a very, very high standard. That's why a mobile phone, the latest, might be worth £1,000 in terms of you buying it. But all of the raw materials that were needed in order to make that mobile phone were dirt cheap because they hadn't been processed yet. And this is the problem. Poor countries sell raw materials, so they don't get much money for them. But we sell finished products like phones, and we get thousands for them. And that's why rich countries develop and poor countries don't. So that takes me to the last point. Rich countries control the processing of the raw materials and the sale of the processed goods. So therefore, rich countries get richer and poor countries get poorer. Make a few summary notes on trade and the price of raw materials there, and the fact that poorer countries sell raw materials which doesn't really earn them very much money. And then move on. Okay, this is also to do with trade, so these notes can also be made in the same section. Commodities are raw materials, so we've just been talking about raw materials. That's what a commodity is. So coffee is a commodity. Cocoa is a commodity. So a commodity is a raw material or a primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold. Agricultural commodities are vulnerable to extreme weather. Think about it, an agricultural commodity is something that you grow, something that you farm. So obviously they're vulnerable to extreme weather, they're vulnerable to soil erosion, any kind of pests like locusts, and they're vulnerable to diseases. And because of that, if, let's say, a farmer has a really bad crop, let's say they're growing coffee, and they have a really bad crop of coffee because there's been an extreme weather event, then it will mean that they've got less to sell, so they earn less money. And knowing that Africa suffers from quite a lot of extreme weather means that often their harvest is pretty bad and they don't earn so much money. Third point. Material commodities are vulnerable to price fluctuations because of new discoveries of resources and world trends in demand. What that's telling you is, let's say a country is mining for copper, and the copper is worth, I don't know, £10 for a kilogram of copper. I'm making this up. I don't know what it's worth, but let's just say it's worth £10 for a kilogram of copper. Now let's say we suddenly find copper in 10 or 20 other countries. So now we've got massive supply of copper in other countries. Well, what that does is it brings the price down. So the price of that copper that you were paying £10 for a kilogram, all of a sudden they're only getting £1 for a kilogram because lots of other countries have discovered that they've got copper too. So the more we discover of products around the world, the value of them suddenly decreases. And that's what we mean by vulnerability of commodities. Their prices are volatile. That means the price is constantly changing. 1 minute it's worth a lot of money or worth more money, and the next minute the price goes down. So I'm going to give you an example of coltan. Coltan is used in the production of batteries for mobile phones. 50 years ago, before phones were really a thing, it had very little value on the world market because there was no real use for it. But now it sells readily because there's a global demand for it. There's a global boom in sales of mobile phones. But in the future, the phone manufacturers might find a different resource that works even better than coltan. Or they might find another resource which is cheaper to make your phone lighter, or is stronger, or is better, longer lasting than coltan. And then once again, coltan will end up being worthless again because the manufacturers will turn their eyes to this other product that they've managed to find which is better. So that's what I mean by vulnerability of commodities. The prices of them can go up and down depending on demand. If you demand something, the price goes up. If you don't demand it anymore, the price goes down because it's useless or it's worthless. Produce a little summary in your explanation, please. When you've done that, move on. That's just to show you an example of copper. I mentioned copper before. Now, copper, Gambia, as a country in Africa, exports 60%, or 60% of its exports are from copper. So 60% of the money that it gets comes from copper, the sale of copper. But look at the price there, how it's fluctuated over the years. So at one point, the price of copper was down at, on average, $2,000 per ton. And then they had some better years. So in June of 2006, 2007, all the way up to 2011, the price of copper went up on the world market. So Gambia would have been earning more money during those years. But look at what's happened recently. The price of it has come right back down again. So Gambia won't make half as much money from the price of copper. So you could from the sale of copper. So you can see how it fluctuates so much that if they're reliant on selling something and the price suddenly plummets, then obviously the country isn't going to get as much money from it, and therefore they struggle to develop. The other thing still linked to trade is trade groups. All of these continents have their own trade groups. So anybody in the any country in the European Union generally will trade in their own group amongst themselves, rather than trading to other continents or the countries outside of the group. They tend to trade within their own group. So we have the European Union trade group. There is NAFTA, which stands for the North American Trade Association, where all the North American countries will trade amongst themselves. We've got MERCOSUR, which basically stands for the Southern Common Market. So that's the whole of South America trading within themselves. We've got ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, trading amongst themselves, and so on. So these are trade groups. And what I'm about to teach you is, if you trade within your own trade group, it's much better for your country, but it isn't good for other countries that are then unable to trade with you. So let's move on and hear all about it. So make some notes, please, on trade. So I'll explain a little bit how the groups work, and then again make one or two notes in your explanation box. So which countries group together to maintain power on the world market? And that's what a trade group is. So all countries within the group will trade, and they will trade freely. What that means is there are no tariffs and quotas for them. So let me explain what they are. Quotas are limits on the quantity of goods that you're allowed to trade. So, for example, a maximum of 1 million tonnes of wheat can be brought from any one country per year. That would be an example of a quota. So let's just say we're England, and let's just say we want to buy wheat from a country in Africa. There will be a quota put on us because we are part of the EU trading group. So if we want to trade with a country outside of the trading group, we would have to, we'd only be able to trade with them within that quota. So we'd only be able to get a maximum, say, of 1 million tonnes of wheat. Now, obviously, we want a lot more than that, so it restricts us on what we can buy from countries outside of the group. And it also restricts the countries outside of the group on obviously what they can sell, what they can export. So it's not great having quotas for countries outside of the group. There are also tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that you pay on imports. So again, for example, 12% tax might be added to the cost of natural rubber, which is imported to the EU from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is again in Africa. So if we were to buy our natural rubber from Africa, we're going to be adding on a 12% tax to the cost. And really, the whole point of quotas and tariffs are to stop countries from trading with countries outside of the group. So in other words, if you continue to trade within your group, you will get it much cheaper because there won't be any taxes, and you'll be able to trade as much as you want because there won't be any quotas. And that's what free trade means. But as soon as you start to try trading outside of the group with, let's just say, our African nations, then there are tariffs put on there and there are quotas put on there. So it's not in our interest, in our country, it's not in our interest to trade outside of the group. And if you are a country in Africa, it's not in your interest to trade with us because of the costs that are put on it for you. So it kind of stops trade with other countries outside of the group. So trade within the trade group is free from taxes and quotas, and that means it's cheaper to buy from another country within your group. Also, you can set your prices within the group so that people don't undercut each other on the export. So if we all sell the same products with the same prices, then people, different countries will not start to try and undercut each other. So it keeps the price fairer. So in this way, high-income countries, what we'll do is we'll allow low-income countries to sell their cheap raw materials to us, but we'll put huge restrictions on them selling manufactured products to us. And that makes trading unlikely for them, and it makes trading unfair. So being in a group favours you, and African nations are not in our group. So therefore, they don't get that good treatment. Okay, so that kind of explains trade. Let's move on. So, low-income countries and newly emerging economies, the majority of exports from low-income countries are unprocessed raw materials, and that keeps their gross national income low. We've already said that because they're selling cheap, unprocessed goods. Newly industrialising economies, they're middle-income countries, and they have been industrialising. This means their manufacturing capability has been growing. So they're now starting to manufacture products. They're starting to process them and finish them. And therefore, they are now exporting manufactured goods. That means processed goods as well. Therefore, their gross national income is increasing because they're selling finished products. That's why newly emerging economies are growing, because they are starting to trade finished products, and that's why they are getting richer. Okay, so that concludes the stuff on trade. So you can draw a line under that, and it also concludes our learning about the causes of uneven development. So I want you to have a go at this question now. Explain 2 reasons why poorer countries earn less money from trade than richer countries. Now you've got a lot of information in your table there, so it's about choosing 2 things and explaining them well. That's how much you should write. The lines give you an indication of how long your answer should be for 4 marks. I put this like this because on previous lessons, for 4-mark questions, people are writing too less, or too little, I should say. A little bit of help for you. You could have, one of your reasons could be to explain about raw materials being cheap, and then explaining that point will get you the 2nd mark. You could talk about volatile prices, the fact they go up and down, and then explain it for your 2nd mark. And finally, you can talk about trade groups, the fact that trading within your group favours you, and because of free trade, which means that poorer countries that are not in our trade group don't get favoured. So state the reason for a mark, explain it for the 2nd mark, and then give another reason. Spend 5 minutes, please, and then move on. Okay, that's a mark scheme for you so that you can dirt your work. So you can pause this, dirt your work, make improvements, and I do want you to be submitting this work to your teacher, please. And now we've come to the end of our lesson, so please make sure that those 2 questions that you can see on the slide are completed and submitted to your teacher, please. Thanks for listening. See you next time.